Could we be living now in the golden era of racetrack building? Look at the magnificent Meydan racecourse in Dubai. And as we speak, at the Curragh, the center of racing in Ireland, they're literally rebuilding it from the ground up. And the same too for Longchamp in Paris. Great new buildings that are replacing tired old facilities with dazzling 21st century buildings. Here in the States, Belmont Park and Pimlico need architectural attention. And so too our oldest racetrack, Saratoga Racecourse. It will be, in the next couple of years, getting some very much needed additions. Additions that must dance with while dancing around the historic and iconic buildings that are already in place there. Racetrack architecture can be a tricky little subject, and our future as an industry will depend greatly on these buildings that are able to adapt and bring racegoers into the 21st century, meeting their needs. To that end, the next group of panelists. To lead them in their discussion, I'd like to welcome from Turnberry Consulting, moderator Paul Roberts. Very good, Paul. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you all. I'm going to start off by just a few introductory notes, although the introductory notes go on for quite a long time. And as Stuart Janney said this morning, racing is truly international, and it's probably international, nearly the most international of all sports. Sports like soccer or football and tennis tend to be very international, but racing sometimes gets past that. And the cultures and the difference of racing in different jurisdictions mean that certain racetracks are wagering focused, some are event focused, some are festival focused. And there's no team, so there's no attraction. The attraction must be to the place, not to necessarily the great desire you have and the closeness of a set of players. And racetracks don't move very often. And we know in the United States that Dodger Stadium is the third oldest baseball stadium in the US, but it was built in 1960. Many stadia move. Racetracks rarely move. New racetrack in Sweden recently was one of the first new racetracks built in Europe in a long time on a different site. And they evolve and change, and the racing systems in which they change are fundamental. When Belmont Park was built in 1968, it was based on the fact that you couldn't bet off track in New York. By the early 1970s, you could, and that business model for Belmont Park suddenly changed. So I'm going to talk today about racing systems and the structures of systems and the history of racing, and then we're going to look at, for a while, what might happen in the future with three colleagues who are going to join me in a moment. So if you're not interested in race courses or pictures of race courses, this was a bad choice. But we'll see whether you can get that. And there is a picture of the Curragh coming up, which I was reliably informed on my way in is the greatest racecourse in the world, by Brian Kavanagh of Horse Race in Ireland, who you could argue is not objective in this assessment. So where do we start? We start by realizing that whilst many pitch-based arrangements, a tennis court, a football stadium, are similar, racecourses are not. And some of the best racecourse builders were the Romans, who were very good at it and built very large racecourses. And if you look at somewhere in Jordan from the 2nd century, it's in reality the Los Angeles Coliseum from later in the day. Same scheme, same arrangement. But racing as we know it now started in 1539 in Chester, the longest continuous racecourse. And the structures they created in the very early days were very, very simple arrangements, where you went in on the ground floor, you took off your boots, you went upstairs, had something to eat, went on the roof, watched what you were doing. And this is why racing is historic, because the first grandstand built on a racecourse, still on that racecourse, is from 1756. Long, long before many other sports were built in situations. And these were for competitive reasons. That racecourse was built to compete against Doncaster for no other reason. And they developed and they arranged over time. And in the UK at that time, they were quite organic in how they were shaped. they were quite complex. Whereas in France, things were much more organized and there was much more rigor. So when the first Longchamp came along in 1857, it was a very organized, orthogonal set of buildings. And one of the most important racecourses that exist today, from a racecourse architecture perspective, Chantilly, was designed in 1880 in that way. And when you look at it today, you see that. And I don't have the facility, as I usually have, of flicking forwards and backwards, because obviously the Jockey Club wasn't able to run to that. But we know that it has hardly changed in terms of its development other than its depth. And remarkable racecourses were built over periods of time. This is Freudenau in Austria. It races little these days, but as an architectural structure, it was very grand. But there's been nowhere grander in its day than New York. In the early 20th century, 3 racetracks all together in Brooklyn, racing 6 days a week, probably the richest collaboration of wealth, horseflesh, and racetracks that ever came together in one place at one time. But racing in the United States has always been fragile because of the structure and the regulation. You start to see by these arrangements how those tracks in the shutdown 1911 never survived and never made progress. But these were remarkable racetracks. Morris Park, which was built in 1889, cost in today's money nearly $1 billion to build. It only lasted 15 years. But in the society time of New York, it was the place to be and the only place to be. Around that time also, we started to get different tracks like Saratoga. This is the post-1902 extruded Saratoga where the grandstand's been stretched. There's the field stand at the end, the betting ring, and the small little clubhouse. Saratoga today remains part of one of the most important racecourse structures anywhere in the world. Of course, the difference with racetracks like Saratoga compared to other places in the world, some other places, is the enormous stabling operations, the number of people that live there and operate there, and the number of horses. But Saratoga at this time was grand compared to its smaller neighbor, which was Churchill, designed originally and built without the twin spires. I wonder what the Kentucky Derby would be today if the architect hadn't thought after the event that we should put something on the top to make it more interesting. But there we are. But even then, there was an aspiration to be great. When August Belmont wanted to build the Westchester Racing Association at Belmont Park, he had one task: to build the greatest racecourse in the world. It was clear in writing to his designer, the greatest racecourse in the world. And in his view, the greatest racecourse in the world would run right-handed, because Ascot and Longchamp run right-handed. And it should have a straight mile, but he couldn't manage a straight mile, so he managed straight 7/8. And he persisted for some years before eventually the racing community of the United States says, we really can't be doing with this, we've got to go left-handed. And that's why when you look at the grandstand as built at that time, you see the clubhouse in what would now be the clubhouse turn, is in the far turn is now at the end of the stretch. And if anybody fancies, when they go to Pimlico tomorrow, thinking that the top bleachers on this grandstand was a place of envy, I would suggest that you might not want to go there. So things became more complicated, and around the turn of the century, racecourses like Ascot had grown to be quite significant events. But you notice how disaggregated and complex Ascot is at that time. A whole series of individual buildings built over a long period, a large infield. And at around this same time, there was one redevelopment that really has dominated redevelopments for a long period of time. It dominated for probably 2 generations, and that was the expansion and redevelopment of Longchamp. So the expansion at this time, this is a rear view of Longchamp at that time, spurned some of the most significant racecourses that have occurred since that period of time. And it's remarkable when we think about the internationalization, how broadly this happens. So we move to Longchamp, and we move to a very similar scheme: the towers, the arches, the facade, and that's the San Siro in Milan, in Italy, built in the same image. Calcutta in India, built in the same image. Montevideo in Uruguay, built in the same image. This was one system, one approach that was taken all over the world. The renaissance of racing in South America, in Argentina, was slightly different in terms of how it developed in Buenos Aires. But even today, there's no substantial change from what was developed at that time and what sits there now, whether that be in Argentina or in Brazil, the stunning nature of the Rio Jockey Club and its scheme of that period of time. But the Longchamp influence dominated in Chile in terms of Santiago and how Santiago was developed, because this was developed almost by an architect from Maryland who went to Chile to build a model he'd found in Paris. That's how complex things have happened during this period of time. And you see the nature of the scheme, how significant it is, but how similar it is to what was conceived in France. And the wonder and the detail. If there's one race course you haven't been to, want to go to, put it on your list, I'd put this one quite close to the top. But the major structural changes occurred at this time with things like Agua Caliente in Mexico, which thrived and was probably the most opulent. One of the few places that had gilt on the bet-in windows. Quite a long shout to put gilt on the bet-in windows. But then all of a sudden it closed. There was no pari-mutuel wager in California. The Depression came, the desire to raise tax, open pari-mutuel wager in Del Mar, Hollywood Park, Santa Anita, and a new racetrack is born, Santa Anita Park. The first automobile, this is the Automobile Club of Southern California, scheme for what was a completely different scheme in its initial phase of how it was created. So all of a sudden there was a fundamental change in the United States, which eventually gets you to schemes like this, opening Saturday Aqueduct post-redevelopment. You could only bet on track. You had to go to the track. 40, 50,000 people every weekday at Aqueduct. That modern style of Froelich, and Mr. Durkin, when we were talking about Frank Lloyd Wright's scheme for Belmont Park, which was rejected by the Greater New York Racing Association in favor of Arthur Froelich and his schemes, was manifest elsewhere in the world, as Sandown Park, Doncaster, Perak in Malaysia, various other places. But this renaissance then spread to Asia, and this is a 1953 picture of Happy Valley. And you'll probably see that, as I show you the next slide, Happy Valley, whilst the nature of the footprint of the stadium or the racetrack hasn't changed, Hong Kong has changed. And Happy Valley still sits there quite happily. And then, to some extent, Hong Kong Jockey Club built their Belmont Park. They called it Sha Tin, and they built a very similar structure. And is there a fragility that could occur if you lose your monopolistic position in relation to wagering? And these schemes continued and went through Tokyo in incredible scale, but sometimes the system got them. I'm going to introduce Don to come here in a moment, and sadly he told me he designed the race course. And when you look at, this is Garden State Park, which once held the richest race in the world. But you look at the towers at the back of the grandstand, and you realize that they've not all survived in the way that you'd want them to. The system gets them, not necessarily the architecture. So then you see things of happenstance, of things like Arlington Park and the new SOM scheme, and you get to what was talked about, the large scheme of Meydan. And there are these very large schemes. But in recent times, have things got more sensitive? Is the desire of the experience of racing rather than a place to wager more important? And schemes have got smaller to some extent and more intimate. This is the long view across from Goodwood, and this is the Goodwood Parade Ring. It would be very hard for me to convince anybody that that wasn't somewhere that you'd want to go and watch a race. I think you'd probably want to go. You wouldn't be driven away by the physical environment. The redevelopment of Ascot focused almost as much on the back as the front. So the back of the grandstand is not necessarily less attractive than the front of the grandstand. And the recent redevelopment of York is at a scale that's appropriate to those social interactions that's occurred in that period of time. At York, the same footprint, the same group of people, a 50% increase in income as a result of regeneration and rejuvenation. And of course, the greatest racecourse in the world, which is the Curragh, which I put up now for you. It's a competition winning scheme of the Curragh, which has started, and also Longchamp, which we talked about just now. Nearly 45% of all the stakes races in Europe are already run at 4 courses, Ascot, Newmarket, Longchamp, and the Curragh. And therefore, for 2 of those courses to be having such significant redevelopments is really very important. But also, we know that elsewhere, this is the new club stand at Flemington in Melbourne, Australia. That's a very significant development. So we're seeing in various parts of the world very large schemes of renewal coming forward after a period where 1960s schemes perhaps didn't work out as well as they could. But we must evolve as things go along. And when we look at everything we have now, and I started with that little John Carr stand, the stand on the left is the Prince's stand at Epsom where they hold the English Derby. It's about the size of the John Carr stand. And the stand on the right is the Queen's stand, which is not a big grandstand. So you see how things have evolved over that period of time. Nearly all these things have been driven by competition, constant competition, and the live race experience. The live race experience is the lifeblood of racing. If you do not have a live race experience, people will not go racing. You cannot get people involved in racing unless they see the experience for itself. And the brand and the quality of what is done becomes more to the fore as people become more selective in what they do. And the other issue of race courses, which is fashion. The only certainty about fashion is it becomes unfashionable. It's the only thing you can guarantee. And those fashions move more quickly than the racecourse structures they envelop. So unless you're able to have a system that deals with fashion in a flexible way, it's a very difficult thing to resolve, which is why racecourses like Saratoga are thriving now, a long time after their conception, in a historic environment. So that's the little history. It's quite stressful up here because it's a bit like Jim Hines running the 100 meters in 1968. I've got the clock ticking down towards me. And I'm doing okay, so if you're worried about that, don't worry anymore. So I'm going to introduce three people who are going to come up. I'm going to introduce Todd Growler, who's going to come up, who's a principal of Populous, Don Dissinger, who's principal of Ewing Cole, and Walter Lynch, who's from Walter E. Lynch and the development advisor to the Maryland Jockey Club. So they're going to come up, and then they're going to speak short little bits for 8 minutes, and then we're going to try and have a bit of a conversation about where things are going in the world and what's going to happen in the future. Thank you.
So good afternoon. As Paul's mentioned, and I agree, there's a lot of great things happening in the racing industry worldwide, advances in design and development. We've been fortunate to be part of that with the design of Ascot. Also work at Churchill Downs, which includes the Winter Circle suites that were completed a few years ago, the Turf Club renovation, and now the Starting Gate Suites Tower, which will be ready for next year. So there are great things happening. Also, we're looking beyond just racing and at our facilities and our projects. What can these racetracks be besides just a racetrack? And our Al Faya project that's conceived for Abu Dhabi is a good example of that, where obviously racing is a key component, but the development in itself is actually much larger resort development, a different variety of equestrian sports, greater attraction, and really serves as a social hub on the outskirts of Abu Dhabi. Probably one of the most successful in North America that I've had the opportunity to take part in was the early part of redevelopment of the Hippodromo de las Americas in Mexico City. This was a facility that went through basically 50 years of status quo under the original family management, that went through a complete renovation, greater use of infield assets, the consolidation of the backstretch in order to add the convention center and other entertainment components. And when it reemerged to the people of Mexico, it really assimilated back into the culture of the time, which was more related to the Gen Xers and the millennials. And that has been a great reason for its success, is because it's a place to go for more than just racing. It's a place to go for a great experience and great entertainment. Now, one thing that's very important to us is, as sports architects, is that we understand that there is, over the past 20 years, been a really rapid segmentation of our typical behavior of the patrons that visit our facilities, whether it's baseball, football, soccer, the sport doesn't matter. The segmentation still exists. And one big thing is that baby boomers were basically the traditionalists. They were our customers that went and liked to sit in a seat and watch. Beginning with Generation X, that has changed and continues to evolve, that our younger patrons, they want to experience the event. They want to engage the event. They even want to impact the event. Whether that's physically or through technology, they want to be part of what's happening. And key to that is, in creating that master important visitor experience, is that it really requires innovative thinking. It requires us to think outside the box, but the good thing is that that experience generates revenue. And shortly after we had opened the Dubai Autodrome, which is a very integrated, very experiential auto racing venue, which has residential components, corporate components, a lot of experience components, we were engaged by Formula One to look at what could be done to recreate road courses for Formula One racing. They have some of the same challenges that we have with horse racing. They have very large pieces of property with very expansive courses, and their events last the better part of a day or even multiple days, and those are big challenges for them, engaging their patrons. And one of the ideas that we developed was what we call the Racing Fan Passport, which allowed us to create a technology-based roadmap that allowed the customers to basically experience the entire course. Instead of being stuck in a grandstand or a corner stand, they were able to use the entire course. They were able to experience different areas. They were, which started with a fan zone or retail zone, which was the entry to the course, and then connected the fans to different points around that course via boardwalks and also areas with historic markers where you could learn about particular race points and history. It gives them vantage points that they would never have if they sat in a traditional racing grandstand, to be able to go out on the track and cantilever over the racetrack itself. And very importantly, it allowed them to engage with the pit crews, the racing drivers, and the technology of racing in the pit area by creating an interactive pit zone where they could learn about the science of speed and the science of racing development, and also even overlook the pit areas themselves to have that firsthand knowledge of what happens. So taking from that kind of experience, we were actually engaged by the Georgia Horse Racing Coalition in the state of Georgia here in the US to create a concept for a new racetrack. And this is a rare opportunity. I mean, we rarely in North America have the opportunity to create a brand new track. And our concept was based somewhat on the Formula One model, where the traditional way of viewing a horse race is from the stands, the fixed stands, where we wanted to totally break that up and say the new way of viewing a race is from everywhere. It's from the infield, it's from the backstretch, it's from all over the place. And the idea was to create the race course as basically the central park of a new community. It has residential, it has hospitality, convention components, sports and recreation, entertainment, nightclubs. So it's much more than a racetrack. It's really a community unto itself, with a lot of different activities occurring. And all of the infrastructure and built components are based on multiple uses, right? So you have a central park that leads up to the paddock, which is actually the square of the community. The paddock can be used obviously during racing as the saddling paddock and parade ring, but then it also serves other purposes throughout the life of that community for entertainment, recreation, sport. And likewise, we're trying to look at minimizing grandstand components that sit empty most of the days, and have developments that utilize the amenities within those facilities that are also required for racing, but obviously can function on their own without racing and be profitable ventures. One big component also is to utilize that great space in the infield that for the most part has always been very sacred to us in the horse racing business, but realizing that as a property development, that space has to be used, and it can be used in a fashion that creates a really incredible experience for the visitors. In the case of Georgia, we had envisioned that there was a media square area, which is actually a giant amphitheater that obviously shows racing during racing, but during the rest of the year or the rest of the days, it can serve as outdoor movie, outdoor performing arts, sports, esports, a lot of different functions. Likewise, with some of the built structures, we want to be able to do more related to technology and relating back to our Gen Xers, our Generation Z. How are they going to interact with these buildings? We realize that technology infrastructure is a really big part of that interaction. Now, regardless of that technology integration, we know that through our design of NFL stadia, professional baseball, and so on, people still want to come together to experience sports and entertainment, and that's not going to change. But we do an incredible amount of research, and we partner with Nielsen to research how people are using technology. For example, VR, how important is it? About 67% of the people in the United States believe, that is Gen Xers and above, believe that virtual reality is the future of the way we view sports. But the interesting thing is that less than 30% believe that we will cease to attend in person. So almost everybody still believes that even though we're going to have a greater integration of technology, we're still going to come together to experience most of our events together. The other things that are important is, although we're integrating technology, what does that really mean to us? You know, are they willing to pay for it? Yes, they're willing to pay for it. For example, a recent study we did showed that people would be willing to pay an additional $20 per seat for power in their seat in an NBA stadium, which is pretty amazing. So we also find some interesting tidbits in our research that we do. And one is here on the screen that, and I hope you can read that. We're doing esports research related to a project that we're designing right now, which is an esports venue. And we wanted to know if the venue were in a location and designed to accommodate betting, gambling on the esports, would it change the amount of attendance that we would have in that venue? And the interesting answer was no. So that's telling us something about the generation we're having to market to right now. They're very interested in experience. They will pay for experience. They will pay for technology and amenities, but they're less interested in the betting product. And I think that's a very telling fact. I have a quick video I'd like to show you that's kind of an eye-opening video about where kind of sports venues are headed. We're in the process of designing a huge esports venue right now in the United States. And this is just a quick commercial about what that venue encompasses. Thank you very much. Yeah, good.
Good afternoon. My name is Don Dissinger, and I've been with Ewing Cole for about 32 years, and I've had the pleasure of designing buildings that Paul has demonstrated have been torn down because the market doesn't serve the facility. That was Garden State Park. I learned from a master about racetrack architecture, and he was a protege of Arthur Froelich. His name was Bob Kraus. And so most of my experience in sports design and in hospitality design was driven by that relationship that I began 32 years ago. And what I learned from Bob was that racing is a glorious sport, but it's driven by an association of its fan to the competition through betting. And most of the funding and experiences that we see here in the United States, and I'll speak mostly about the United States, although we were the architects of the Singapore Turf Club, but that's one of the great gambling meccas of Asia. It's not about the social experience as you might see in Britain today. What I'd like to talk about today is the social experience regaining its traction in American racing. So All the stadiums that you saw are glorious representations of the spirit of watching a live race, which we believe is important. Attending the venue is a social experience, watching the race. But what's key to that is all the other things this next generation wants to experience while they're attending an event. And so in the mid-1960s, 50s, all the stadiums in the United States had downsized from being large group attendances to integrate smaller venues that were multi-purpose sports. And what you'll see is all of those glorious stadiums, whether it's Belmont for racing, whether it was the original Ascot, or if it was the multi-purpose stadiums in Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, where you had a collection of people that were watching the race. And the amenity package was pretty much limited. Yeah, there's television, you're broadcasting these sports, but there was really no social experience at these tracks. Today's modern stadium, driven post-Walt Disney era and really coming to life with Populus's first building at the Brickyards down in Orioles, for the Orioles, what you found is the experience was now a gathering. Same idea of gathering people together, but providing them a social interaction. A lot of other activities. There it was Utah Street. It was everything from Boog's Barbecue to interactive activities for the family. And so what sports, NFL and baseball in particular, did was to drive down into the next generation of fan to create a social interaction. And so those stadiums that you see today are not just there for the gathering of the crowd. They're there to celebrate the sport and many other activities. It's an extension of time before and after the event. So if you're going to expand your fan base, obviously you got to address the strategy for those fans. And who are they? To me, you can't begin a design without understanding what it is you're going to provide your guests and the flexibility that we've talked about to allow the fashion of providing for that guest to change easily within the infrastructure of a building. The consumer marketplace, as Todd has already presented to you, is really driven by three groups of people that constitute 75% of the spending power in our country today. Obviously, it's guys like me, boomers. That's about 25%. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got the millennials, which are now emerging. The millennials themselves are now aggregating one of the largest spending buys in our society today. But if you gather the Gen X generation, which is sandwiched between 75% of your market for anything that you're going to do is coming from those individuals, and they're slightly different. We know what the boomer does because that's who we are. But the Gen Xers and the baby boomers that really constitute the opportunity to create new, lively demonstrations of social interaction at your properties are what we should be programming for. And so what does that mean? Well, most recently in Sports Business Journal, there was an article specifically on this subject which talked about racetracks that are betting on younger fans who are interested in a social experience. So what does that mean? What is the social experience? If you're designing for customer loyalty out of the millennials and Gen Xers today, you're looking at a potential $1.3 million consumer marketplace. So what does that mean in terms of consumer trends? Millennials are a social generation. They are by and large inclusionary. They're not exclusionary. So grandstands and racetracks and buildings that segregate are not their interest. And I believe that we have seen in all the racetracks that you've been to recently, we have merged all of those spaces into a single entrance, a single access, and start to repurpose those things so there's multiple experiences. It's not a price differentiation. It's not a segregation. And they're not influenced by advertising as much as they are brand loyalty. And if you are a brand, and a brand in racing is different than a brand in baseball, if you are a brand, their loyalty to it is because you, as a brand, give something back to the community in which they live. These are important strategies to have as a part of reprogramming your property so that the people you're attracting understand you're committed to a longer, broader goal within the community. So designing the racetrack of the future is not looking at an edifice, an arcade, an arch, a roof, or an identity. It's about messaging to your audience what you're going to allow them to do interactively at your place every day they come there. And that's really what we start to do. Obviously, technology, I know Todd and I are friendly competitors and have been for all our lives. Technology is the answer, but it's expensive. So the question is how and where do you put those monies? Even if you have land, can you really redevelop the land? If you have an existing building, how do you repurpose it economically? But the idea is to create something that's interactive, and it allows for men, women, and families to start to build a connection to what you are selling to the community. Millennials actively seek out environments that foster social collision. So, if you look at a standard stadium today, this is what you're going to see. What's happening really under the underbelly of those stadiums is not just what you see at the event. Even in football, you're going to find that behind the scenes, there are spaces in which everything else is going on, from Infinity Live, media centers, entertainment, food halls, things that are slightly different than a concession stand and a view of the event. And certainly more so at racing. At racing, we do baseball buildings as well. And in those baseball buildings, be it minor league or major league, the reality of it is that what is going on in a baseball building is really a social experience. Yep, we're milling about, we're eating and drinking, we're celebrating, we're seeing, we're watching others, and it's constant. And it's a long-lived event. Baseball's a 3-hour, maybe a 4-hour experience. You arrive pre-game and you leave post-game. And if you're in a major urban area, you don't want to leave right away because there's too much traffic coming and going. So the idea is to build the engine so that it can connect to a larger group of people over a longer period of time. So when you look at socializing and milling and all those things, what you begin to see is not stadium experiences as much as gathering experiences near the event that are being served by social experiences adjacent to the venues and the pitch. And you want to be able to see it all together. So you have to open up these facilities so what's happening before, during, and after a race is seamless and connected. Betting is now something that you can do on your phone. So you don't need to have a lot of space geared towards queuing and betting. You need to have space that allows you to assemble and gather large groups of people to be entertained. So today's stadium experiences, in our mind, offer that opportunity. As we said, it's inclusionary, not exclusionary, and it's integrating technology with a simple user interface. So one of our buildings, Citizens Bank Park, the whole exterior of the building is a 24/7 connection to the town. We have retail, which is the team store. We have McFadden's, which is a sports bar, which relates to the Eagles when it's the Eagles playing. It relates to the Flyers when the Flyers are playing. But it is attached to the baseball building and part of the connection between the town and the gown. And when you move in, and then the outfield areas, they're open to the stadium. They're pretty much a free ticket, but in that you get food, outdoor food halls, and things that allow it to become a place to go for families and to gin up the next generation of fan. So if you're inside the building, you traditionally had a stadium with a concession stand or a suite. Today, it's a food hall with a suite and or an experience and a retail experience all seamlessly connected so that any fan, anyone that wants to be part of that social setting can find something to do before, during, and after the game. And between games because it's part of the town and the gown. So as you begin to redefine the spectator experience, it's not about seating and it's not about just viewing. It's about socializing with larger groups, and it's about coming longer and earlier and staying longer. And I think racing fits that mold beautifully, and I think what we have to learn how to do is reprogram from the paddock to the race and everything in between, so it's a series of seamlessly connected events, stimulated by great technology and purposed for large groups as well as small groups. At Emerald Downs, a building I did maybe 22 years ago, was just recently acquired by the Muckleshoot Indians. So what did we do there? We repurposed all of the social spaces in the clubhouse. We introduced a card room, and the whole idea there was to provide the next generation's social experience at the racetrack. That just opened, it's doing well. We've seen handles on the on-track simulcasting experience double since this facility's opened. Not so much because it offers it, but because how it's offered. The kinds of video, the interaction, the way that they're sharing information about racing, and the way in which they're promoting the social side of it, be it food and beverage and or entertainment within the sports environment. At Hialeah Park, 200 acres, fabulous old track, and what I find extraordinarily interesting about Hialeah is it was challenged as a racetrack for a long time. It's no longer a thoroughbred racetrack, it's a quarter horse racetrack. But that didn't stop the Brunettis to figure out how that site would be repurposed as part of the community. 200 acres in Miami, between the ocean and the Everglades, it's got value. The question is what is that value, and how does racing and entertainment stimulate that development? We rebuilt the grandstands into a casino, simulcast, and special events center, which is the hub of a new entertainment center, which is being built out with hotel and residential development. And I think also the thing that you have to realize is that live entertainment, as Todd had talked about, is definitely a part of these properties. We are an architect for Live Nation. We design entertainment centers called the Fillmore around the country for them, and they're 2,000, 1,000 seat type of spaces, but they're in places where usually retrofitted urban facilities. Racetracks create a logical opportunity for that. And we designed one recently up in Calgary, not built, it was during the recession, but most recently opened one in Philadelphia in one of the older sections, Northern Liberties of Philadelphia. These things look for repurposed space, and racetracks have this opportunity. So now you integrate live entertainment as a venue, and you integrate the alternate restaurant experiences, and you begin to create a social destination which will attract the millennial generation. So real simply, we believe that a great building isn't a great building unless there's a social program that goes with it. And most importantly, if that experience attracts a group and it's successful, it'll continue to promote itself. And that's the goal, to create, in my mind, a synergetic stadium and social experience of the future. Thank you.
Good job. Welcome to Washington. My name is Walter Lynch. I am an architect and planner based in DC. We are mostly known in this area for developing FedEx Field, the home of the Redskins. We also, in our many years of developing and planning, we also have done large renovation projects such as the Chrysler Building in New York and other developments around both New York and Washington. Today I am here as the architect, planner, and development manager for the Maryland Jockey Club and the Stronach Group. We have been working with the Stronach Group for 15 years, redeveloping, repositioning the properties here in the Washington metropolitan area. I would like to, when we get involved, and I agree with everything my colleagues here have said, so I don't want to repeat everything they said, because I think we're all on the same page as far as placemaking and repositioning and being able to get up and create a completely new fan experience. The trick, as we see it, is how to sell that. And what we've learned is not to sell it, is to tell it. And the best way to tell it is present a little bit of history behind horse racing. And we've gone through this long history of different facilities. And what I'd like to do today is kind of talk a little bit about the Maryland Jockey Club, and then tell you about some, you'll be seeing Pimlico shortly, and the Preakness, and I'll give you a little bit of perspective of where we're coming from and what we're trying to reinvent. So with that said, when we look at projects, we look at both the opportunities and the obstacles. And the Maryland Jockey Club is a true opportunity. What very few people know is the Maryland Jockey Club is an organization that predates the founding of this country. Founded in 1743, the Maryland Jockey Club is the oldest sports racing organization in both America and Great Britain. By the time, whoops, I think we might want to step back one, sorry. Thanks. By the time George Washington, a frequent guest of the Maryland Jockey Club, noted in his 1762 journal that he lost 1 pound, 2 shillings at the Maryland Jockey Club races, the club had already been around for 20 years. Very few people, when we're going through an approval process, very few people understand that, the deep history of horse racing. And Maryland Jockey Club, was officially incorporated in 1830, and today the charter is housed right down the street here at the Library of Congress. Races were a popular form of entertainment and drew from all walks of society in the Washington area. The Maryland Jockey Club appealed to a broad range of local residents and leaders of our country. Even Andrew Jackson, our 7th U.S. president, was a member. So when we start telling and preparing all these projects of what we've talked about so far require a tremendous amount of groundwork. And you have to go in and really prepare an elected official and citizens who are going to be behind the rezoning and the approval and sometimes the funding, just how important this to keep this tradition going. And so over the last 15 years, we have repositioned Pimlico, Laurel, Bowie, and now Rosecroft in the metropolitan Washington area. What I'd like to concentrate on today that I think is important in context of what this panel is talking about is really concentrate on our project in Laurel, Maryland. It is a jewel of a site. We are repositioning the property to create a multi-use smart growth community. It's centrally located between Baltimore and Washington. It has I-95, Baltimore-Washington Parkway running up either side. It has a bunch of cross routes, so it has great infrastructure. It's close to BWI Airport, and more importantly, it has a train line that's running right down adjacent to the property. Back in the heyday of the racetracks, they all had trains. They had different types of modes of transportation to get to these facilities. We have come 360 degrees, and we are now at a point where, particularly in Washington, as you might have noticed, we are gridlocked. And that gridlock has created an opportunity for these large tracts of land that are set right in urban centers. Most of them have train lines that run near them. Most of them have tremendous infrastructure because back in the heyday, we had 30, 40,000 people coming out on a weekend. So this infrastructure is something that we've been able to leverage. and then at the same time teaching about the history of the project and the history of horse racing, we've really been able to create a master plan that that repositions both horse racing, but repositions the whole placemaking of the property so that people will have multiple experiences, and you will capture different people, different from younger to older, people that have never been to the races, people who are starting to come to the races, people who have been there for a long time. But the key is getting them there once and then bringing them back. And you have to have a lot of activity to keep that experience continuing. So the very first thing we're doing is, as most of you already know, and I'm probably the least qualified to talk about horses other than my daughter owns a few, that it really is the backbone of these facilities is the backstretch. So over the last 4 years at Laurel, we've been rebuilding the backstretch, creating state-of-the-art barns, therapeutic training centers, housing for both the horses and the employees, and really improving the conditions so that by improving the conditions, the Stronach Group believes that improves the product. And they've put a lot of money where their mouth is, and really have been going after and rebuilding the real core of the racetrack. The next component of the track is the train station. Like I mentioned earlier, these facilities used to have trains coming there. Now, with all the gridlock around Washington, this is a great opportunity for Laurel to reposition itself and become a smart growth community so that you attract people there to live there, to work there, to play there. And by creating that community in this centrally located location and make it convenient to get there and leave there to go to work, you really create a new signature for the facility. The train station has 1,000 parking spaces. It can carry tens of thousands of passengers every day. And as part of that train station, we're also building a main street. And the main street is connected to the grandstand so that they can play off of each other. The main street has several thousand new residential units. It has retail, hotel, office spaces, and all located around the train station and the grandstand. So that, again, we're trying to create this new a new urban experience, and it's a rare opportunity to have all this acreage to actually redevelop and reimagine. We're also building a branded residence, and we're taking this history that I described and really playing it and creating this community. And the easiest way for me to get somebody to buy into our project and to tell them about a project is really not to come to a race. It's coming out, I get them out there at 7 o'clock in the morning and see several hundred horses training. And it's an amazing sight. And it's a pretty easy tell to be able to show different people that either are going to be buying it or having to approve it, to see that this is a community where you could wake up in the morning and have a spectacular experience. So with that said, what we're really pushing for, and what I think the message that I'm trying to put forth today, adding on to what my colleague said, is really the keys to repositioning Laurel has been educating elected officials and citizens about, one, the deep history, two, the amount of open space that the industry preserves for every horse that is training and every horse that is running. There is a tremendous amount of open space in Maryland and Virginia that are created to be able to redevelop or that will be kept in preservation to support this race or support this facility. And then the last is just common sense of by placemaking, by changing the concept, changing the property, you also change the property values, and that increases their tax base. So the cooperation of local governments and the cooperation of the citizens is imperative. So with that said, I'll hand it back to Paul, and thank you for listening.
Okay, so I'm going to have a little discussion here, and just to keep you on your toes, let's completely change around from what you thought was a good idea this morning. So Walt, I'll start with you. In terms of integrated development where you have commercial activity on a racetrack, probably Gulfstream Park was one of the first schemes anywhere in the world to really tackle that. What within the Stronach Group have you learned from Gulfstream that you're bringing to Maryland, and what are the lessons that you think people in the audience can learn from Gulfstream Park itself?
Yeah, one of the great things of working for the Stronach Group is they're constantly reinventing themselves, and they're constantly looking for better ways to improve. You know, from a development point of view, what I see at Gulfstream is if you want to create a year-round, 24/7 environment, you really need more residential. So that part of it, I think, where I would really, would be improve that. That said, Gulfstream has been extremely successful for the Stronach Group, and they will continue reinventing it and making it stronger.
How are you thinking at Maryland about the sequence of the sale and disposal of real estate assets and how those are reinvested in the racing side? Is that something that has to follow, or does it generate revenue and that revenue is applied to the racing side? How's the sort of model going to work to get to the right racing plant over the long term?
Yeah, so as I said, I mean, you really need the participation of government to really help you, because as we were talking earlier, just different property values and really being able to leverage your property, you need to rezone it and you need to reposition it. And by doing that, you're going to create more equity and more cash flow, and that repositioning and rezoning will help everybody. It'll help the racing, it'll help the retail, it'll help the residential, and it'll help the commercial components of it.
Is the brand of the commercial development going to change or develop the brand of the racetrack?
No, I think they're hand in hand, because you really need to have an experience. If you can imagine in the old days of going to a mall, you used to have an anchor here, an anchor there, and a bunch of small stores in between. You know, that day of those anchors are not completely gone, but they're going. So what's happening now is you're breaking it up into smaller pieces, and by breaking those smaller pieces around a big anchor of a racetrack, you have this beautiful open space. You have the ability of having this great fan experience of being in a town center or being around retail, but you attract new people to racing by repositioning it.
Okay, if people are particularly interested in the whole idea of building a new residential community on a racetrack, and you're looking to see one that's further down the track, look at Newbury Racecourse in the UK, which is very well advanced and has now taken its income and started spending that income on the racing assets. So that might be something you might want to look at. When we think about the comparison of other sports, Todd Populous has done lots of other tracks. How do you, lots of other tracks, lots of other venues, where do you think racing sits at the moment in terms of the live sport experience when compared to the other leisure opportunities that people have?
Fairly low on the feeding chain, I would say. as the guy in Populous, that most of my work is related to equestrian sport. I'm always looking towards our Major League Soccer or the guys doing Olympic venues, FIFA venues, for ideas that I can pull into our projects related to racing and equestrian. And it's amazing, our technology that we're integrating into racetracks is still based on live video, historic racing data, odds, and that's not very interactive. What we're integrating in other facilities, for example, like the MLS stadium under construction right down the road here in DC, is incredibly advanced. Working with Adidas to create smart uniforms, where the patrons in the stadium have instant access to body temperature, heart rate of any individual player on the field. They're able to interact with an open data system in the stadia, where we have in our racetracks basically a closed data system, mainly consisting of live video feeds from the paddock or around the track, and not very interactive. So there's a huge difference in, almost a multi-generational difference in the technology we see in racetracks versus other major professional sports venues.
Where you have historic racetracks, and many people in racing would say there's a lack of capital, there's desire to maintain purses, that's the first objective. There's not enough money, but in those circumstances, is there any reason why older buildings can't take advantage of that technology?
Yeah, they can definitely take advantage of the technology. On average, our stadiums that for professional sports that are being rebuilt every 20 to 30 years. In racing, we're dealing with 50-plus-year-old buildings for the most part. But there's absolutely no reason those buildings can't take on the same level of technology that a new one can. It obviously takes space. It takes a lot of infrastructure related to utilities, data, but it can certainly do it. The interesting thing is that, and I was talking a little bit about esports, which is kind of one of the big, the hot buttons, I think, over the next 20 years with Generation X, Generation Z. That's what they're interested in, is that I believe that racetracks could actually be a really good platform for esports venues, because we have land, we have big facilities, and if the technology infrastructure were integrated, which both supports racing but supports the more advanced esports stuff, I think there's a real opportunity there that needs to be realized.
Don't put your pen on your microphone if you don't want to frighten yourself. It's quite easily done when you're from the UK. And particularly if you're Welsh. So, Don, let's talk about something that's different. Many of the sports, particularly in the United States, are very what I call fixed sports. Whether it's rugby or American football, they start at a specific time. You know how long a half's going to be, more or less. Something happens at half time, the game finishes. Racing's not like that. It's a much longer sport. People don't always come at the start of the day. People come for a specific time. And baseball has some of those characteristics as well. So how do you think the trends are going to change from what you've learned from baseball about the need to have that longer event experience, and how could racing best capture that?
Well, when we were doing Citizens Bank Park, the CEO at the time, Dave Montgomery, was very concerned that their particular team was people were coming for the game and going home. And so the whole concept of that planning opportunity was to open up the stand and open up the space and connect it to the city so that it was a place to go 24/7 and integrate more with the fabric of the town, similar to what you guys are doing on some of your larger projects. So I believe that, racing and baseball are similar in that it's an experience that can be shared by families, number one. Number two, it's an experience that is going to transcend much longer than the event. And for the idea of baseball, it's a 3.5 hour sport. We know from post time, if you have 10 or 12 race cards, you're there for 3 or 4 hours. Now you could come earlier if there was more activity. So you got to program activities into the building that will be shared experiences by larger groups. And what we did at the Phillies, we've started to do at Hialeah, and we're considering at other racetracks that we work with to expand through co-development partners, other entertainment that's part of that destination. And then what I think will happen in that is there'll be an overlap of a younger fan base becoming interested and connected if you have the technology and if you have other forms of entertainment and, quote, restaurant development that brings people there. Baseball's done that pretty much across the board everywhere. I think more so than any other sport. And so that's where I begin to see the similarity.
Okay. Baseball obviously is very brand focused as well. I mean, personally, for me, a trip to Fenway Park is probably one of the most impressive brand experiences I've ever come across. A lot of history to work with. I took my son to a camp in New York a couple of years ago, and there was a sign at the front saying "No Red Sox." That was the welcome you got when you arrived there, which has seemed to give me a little bit of an illustration into American culture. But I've been to racetracks where it's really difficult to know that it's a racetrack at all. Is it difficult to integrate brand into a racing facility where you don't have a team, or can you overcome that issue?
That's the point. Some big sports. I don't care if you're in the Premier League or if you're in the National Football League. You have a team, which drives your loyalty, both to the stadium and to the experience. Boston's unique, and Wrigley's unique. There are urban environments which have exposed the town and the gown experience to the city. So you're coming to a destination place, as well as a brand, which is the Red Sox or the Cubs. But the point is, in racing, what you have an opportunity to do, because everybody has a lot of land, is to connect it to the town, open its doors, open its gates, and begin to create development that synthesizes the relationship between the community you live in and the activity within, because it's going to be a place that's a brand. I think even across the country, all the places you demonstrated in your presentation, there are unique places. And a lot of them, Ascot's unique because it has the town, but they're the place to be. They're a place. And you're not going to be able to brand the sport as easily because it's horses, jockeys, and operators. But you can create a destination in which you synthesize the history of racing, the culture of open space and large land holdings as part of a community development process. And I think that co-development with other entertainment forms to connect town and gown to the city is the way you create a destination and a brand. Because Hialeah Park, for instance, is Hialeah Park. It's a brand. It's not about horse racing, it's about Hialeah as a place and everything else that you can create within that.
Okay, I've got some other things. We're going to take any questions, if anybody's got any questions from the floor. Otherwise, I'll keep asking questions. So anybody want to start? Somebody couldn't be sitting further away. Is that someone with an arm, or they've got a bit of cramp? What's that problem?
I think everybody's.
Oh my goodness, right. This is a higher intellectual plane we're moving on to now.
I'd like to ask each, thank you very much, gentlemen, for presenting today. It's fascinating stuff. I'd like to ask each if you could just tell us your favorite venue, whether it's one you worked on or one you've admired.
Walter, you start with American Jockey Club.
Well, I'm from Boston, so my front door says no Yankees fans. So I'm a Fenway guy.
Well, in sports, I'm kind of a Wrigley guy in terms of the town and gown and the experience of a brand. I think there's a lot to learn there.
Yeah, for me, it's baseball. Target Field, Minneapolis, I think is one of the best stadiums for socialization, and also one that really integrated itself into the downtown, into the city very well.
I think you might have been hoping someone would mention something about racing, okay? Not sure about that, but so perhaps I can give a little bit of color on that, but that's a really, really hard question, a question I get asked quite regularly when I speak, and there's a sort of a stock answer, which is that, people might think, particularly from the US, that the view from the grandstand at Santa Anita is superior to any other view you can imagine at any racetrack. But go to Murano in Italy and you'll probably find that the view is superior in that respect. I'm on record as saying that if you're going to only keep one racecourse in the world, and the Triffids came, which one would you keep? I said Saratoga. And the reason I said that is because Saratoga has a little bit of history from every period. One, it's a caravan racetrack, so it has a backstretch. And every piece of history, all the way through, from 1864 to 1902 to 1930 to 1950, to the changes, show the history of racing as in the world. So Saratoga is really important in terms of the racetrack. And given that you're sitting next to Mr. Romane, it was really tough for me to say, but I think my favorite is Ascot. So there we are.
Thank you.
I
Yes.
agree with you, Paul, that Saratoga Racecourse is one of the best. Not because I live 4 blocks from there, but because I love Saratoga. But I think one of the reasons, and people ask me, why is Saratoga so popular? And also, why is Belmont not so popular? Because unless it's Belmont Stakes Day or one of the big race days that they're putting together there. And the big difference to me is the intimacy that there is at Saratoga. You have a very close, almost visceral experience with the athletes, the horses, and the jockeys who walk through the crowd. And you do not get that at Belmont Park. You're much better off watching the horses at Belmont through high-power binoculars or watching it on a TV screen. So and it's a tricky thing because you can't, you've got to keep the horses pretty separate from you because they're dangerous to be around. But how can you get that intimacy integrated into a racetrack? It's a sticky wicket, as you would say in England.
Yes, absolutely. Well, once you get past 30,000, 35, 40,000 people, that becomes a big challenge wherever it is. There's 2 things you need to think about. One is the proximity of the grandstand to the rail. One is the configuration of the racetrack, and one is the horse movement behind. Whether you're in a country that has pre-parade in or saddle-in, and whether it has a parade ring, paddock, mounting yard, whatever you might call it, and how the horses come to the track. I mean, you say that Saratoga is intimate. Saratoga was designed for the horses to walk through the grandstand, through the clubhouse, onto the racetrack, not around the side of it. So I think if you stay with a domestic scale, then you can achieve that intimacy really easily. When you're trying to build a racetrack for 120,000 people or 200,000 people, then that becomes a real challenge to what you can do. So one of the questions you've got to ask is the whole issue about capping capacity and whether you should get bigger and how big you should be and what the objectives are. But even at a very big race course, if you have good horse walking and you want to draw the horses through the crowd, then you'll tend to find you have intimacy. But you must try to do it, and you must make it part of what you wish to do. And for many racetrack operators, exposing, for people who saw, have seen problems and issues that are happening in racetracks, the idea of walking horses past crowds on a repeated basis to demonstrate the intimacy of what's going on is an operational challenge that some would rather not have. And from a marketing perspective, some that you would rather have. But it's a great, delicate thing to try and resolve it effectively. It's very difficult.
Yes, when people are looking for authentic experiences, and I think one thing that I've heard a lot about is going away from the horse and offering other things at our venues. But what about just what Tom was talking about, an intimate experience? I mean, just the idea of the Formula One where they were walking over top of the pit crew. We need to think about what customers really want. And they want to be up close and personal with the horses. And we have the backside of the racetrack, and it's not all just about the day that the horse races and the 2 minutes it's on the track. If people could walk through the barns at the Kentucky Derby and go over top where the horses couldn't see them, and you could look down in there and see what was going on with the horse, the closer we bring the fan to the horse and the more authentic the experience, I think that's what the fans are craving. I see that in Kentucky. We just started the horse country, which is trying to mimic the Bourbon Trail, and we're letting people come on the farms, and I think it's creating a lot of interest, and we need to somehow brainstorm and get ideas. How do we transfer that onto the racetrack and wanting to follow our sport?
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the horse is obviously a unique thing that we have as an equestrian sport that auto racing doesn't have, soccer doesn't have. You know, we're man and horse, not man and ball or car. It's a living thing that interests a lot of people worldwide, no doubt. And we've actually, looked at some concepts where there's obviously a lot of pressure on the amount of space we take for backstretch areas and things because of the value of land, and so many of our tracks are urban or have grown to be in an urban area. But actually looked at even in areas at tracks where we are proposing that most horses come as haul-ins, actually creating small holding stable areas that at least can accommodate the racing card of the day, and have areas that are kind of elevated, although not to the level of that Formula One concept, because obviously the horses are much more sensitive to the crowds and things, but elevated lawn areas where people, actually pulling those barns are not on the backstretch anymore. They become part of kind of the core area of the racetrack, where people, the major pedestrian promenades coming into the paddock and into the buildings themselves, where people can actually have a lawn and overlook, the horses getting a bath, early morning workouts, the jockeys and trainers and people's talking strategy and things. Because the horse experience is definitely a big part of it. And how do you integrate that, And one of the challenges we always have here in the United States is, it's a state by state issue related to, how our pari-mutuel rules are written and where certain areas that people can access. And even when it comes to trying to do new things like that into a backstretch area or relocate stables can become a very difficult task here, depending on the jurisdiction you're working in. If that piece of property is part of the pari-mutuel licensed area, sometimes you can't do anything. You actually have to take it out of that licensed area in order to allow the public back there or create other kinds of development. So, I mean, I totally agree with you. There are a lot of challenges related to doing that, but I think that people having a glimpse of what the day in the life of a horse is important. It's also important in combating a lot of the misconception about how racehorses are treated that we're dealing with too. Okay. If people just knew how well they were treated, that would be an easier battle to fight.
Okay, we've got time for one more question, I think. We don't have one more question. That's no problem. Keeps me ahead of the sheriff, so to speak. So I just want to say a couple of things, which I've been picking up as we go along, whilst we run this down for a moment. The whole issue, live race experience. Live race experience is the lifeblood of your sport. If you don't have a good live race experience, if when you go to the track, there isn't something that grabs you about it, then that becomes a problematic issue. The competition in New York, when you look at the two racetracks in New York, you only have to look at the baseball stadiums, the basketball stadiums, Madison Square Garden, Flushing Meadow. You realize you're in a competitive environment in sports. Unless you're able to deal with that, it's really, really a challenge. Aging facilities need to be dressed, and they don't always need to be dressed with tens of millions of dollars every time. There's sometimes a solution which is not that complex to make things work that are lightweight and flexible. The most important issue that any property you have, I hear so often in racing, there's no money, there's nothing we can do. At the time that you've got no money, you have to find a plan that is inexpensive, that makes it work. You must always have a plan, whatever the circumstances. You can't just say, there is no money. So that gives me 1 minute, 25 seconds, and we're all done at this end. We'll hand back to Mr. Durkin.
All right, that was great stuff. And Paul, love your socks. They are part red, Yankee fans. But That was terrific. I really enjoyed that quite a bit. So we're just about to conclude our business session for the day, but the fun lies ahead. A couple quick reminders. Again, we want to thank our sponsors and exhibitors who made today possible, and especially to the Stronach Group for presenting the Preakness Stakes Celebration Dinner this evening. As a reminder, shuttles will depart from the Hyatt Regency and the Grand Hyatt at 6:15 sharp. Signage and volunteers will be stationed near the shuttles to assist you, and this as well. After you give the shuttle reminder, Tom, a slide about the Preakness ticks will come up, and you need to say, for conference attendees who pre-registered for Preakness tickets, you can pick them up tomorrow from 7:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. at the registration desk. They will be distributed by name. And if you don't have a ticket, folks, you can't get in. Thank you. Luis.
Thank you, Mr. Tom. Please join us for breakfast in the foyer and exhibition area at 7:30, following by the start of the day 2 at 8:10 a.m. And finally, remember to take all of your personal belongings and value with you when you leave today. Have a great evening. Have a blessing Thursday. Bendición en este jueves. And be safe and arrive very good.
Hasta mañana.
Hasta mañana.